Ian, so all those books, all those awards, all those tours, all that activity, I mean, the surprising thing is you're only going to be 50.
Well, I started very young.
But what drives you? I mean, that's a huge amount to achieve.
Well, I mean, what drives you mostly as a writer is the need to make some money. It's like any other job. You do need to survive. You've got family, you've got kids, you've got a mortgage, or you've got rent, you've got whatever. And I'm sure that was at the back of my mind when I was writing Noughts and Crosses, was the idea of writing something that was maybe more mainstream, that was going to sell a few more copies than some of the Scottish literature that I'd seen as a student. You know, the number of poets that I'd had evenings out with who were having to hand sell their own books, and even at that, we're just barely getting by on a level of subsistence from the Scottish Arts Council. And I knew from having gone and talked to the Scottish Arts Council Literature Department, they weren't keen on giving me any money. So I thought, well, I better write books that might have a chance of selling on their own or standing on their own. But I mean, I was very lucky in the early days. The first book, The Flood, was picked up by Polygon, which at that time was owned and run by Edinburgh University Student Association. My editor was a student, the artist was a student, it was proofread by a lecturer in the English department. And that gave me that wee foot up that every writer needs, you know, because I'd been published, even though it was only 200 hardbacks. An agent came sniffing around, and she was the one who eventually got Noughts and Crosses. She sent Noughts and Crosses off to half a dozen London publishers, and the first 5 turned it down. And the 6th one, Bodle Ahead, I was very pleased to be accepted by, because they published Muriel Spark and Ronald Frame. They're a pretty good Scottish list. They had an editor called Ewan Cameron, and he'd put together a pretty good Scottish list. And he also had people like Graham Greene, who I was a huge fan of. And I remember going down for a meeting, you know, to sign the contract or whatever, and went into this lovely square in Bloomsbury, and it was all publishing houses. It was Jonathan Cape was there, and there was Bodle Ahead, and there was somebody else. And I went in, and there were these I was thinking it was going to be Chesterfield sofas in the waiting room, and Muriel Spark would be sitting there, and Graham Greene would be sitting there waiting to go and see their editor, have a spot of lunch with them. And it was all, you know, it was all a bit more hair shirt than that. But my editor did take me out for a good lunch, as was the practice in those days. And we did the deal on Noughts and Crosses. It was great. But it had been partly written across the road. I mean, I can actually, from where I'm sitting, see the National Library. And as a postgraduate student at Edinburgh, you get a ticket. At that time, you couldn't get a ticket for the National Library until you were a postgrad. So up until then, I'd been using the Central Library and the University Library. And then suddenly, I also had access to the National Library. And they'd given us a wee tour and shown us the underground vaults where all the books were kept, which linked straight through to here. And some of which used to be prison cells, or cells for the people who were being tried at the High Court. And it was just fascinating, the sort of underground Edinburgh that existed, and I could see straight away it was a great scene for the climax to a book.